Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host Talking with Famous People. I'm here with Kaizo. And Kaizo just asked an interesting question. How do you transcend your cognitive function configuration? In other words, how do you become an EINSTFPJ? And the answer is you don't, in my opinion. Um, it's absolutely true that we are, to a certain extent, slaves to our habits of attention. What I mean by that is when I start a new day, I started ideating. I wake up with my brain going full of ideas and extroverted intuition and stuff like that. Sometimes I'll wake up with FI rolling. What that means is I wake up angry usually. And I'll be angry at someone or something in particular. Sometimes I wake up angry at the police and the attorney in Pratt, Kansas. Last night I woke up angry at Harvey Weinstein in the middle of the night. Had violent fantasies about him. And then I went back to sleep. But if I'm not waking up in a state of anger, then I'm waking up in a state of ideation. Now, the question then is I'm absolutely limited by my cognitive function stack in the sense that I am a procrastinator, I'm an avoider, I don't like to do the follow through on things, I'm insecure about my SE. I don't like having decisions that have already been made dictating my actions in the moment. I like to express ideation actively, which means I may have a clear idea of what I ought to do right now. The fact that I have a clear idea of what I ought to do right now is a good indication that I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do something else because I've got the ideation already done on that thing. So I don't want to actually do it. I don't want to follow through on it. That's the end of ideation. That's the boring part. The question then becomes, how do I transcend that? How do I make it so that I can do the things I have to do when I have to do them for reasons that are practical, that are following through on decisions already made, that don't fall into my wheelhouse of ideation, thinking, and extrovert intuition, and a little bit of extrovert feeling, yada, yada, yada. Well, I think the answer to that for the ENTP is to rely on FE. If you create situations in which it will be embarrassing to you if you fail, you probably won't fail in those situations. In other words,
Yeah.
if I say let's have a meeting on Wednesday afternoon about this thing I want to try to sell as a product, and they say okay, we'll see you Wednesday afternoon, I'll have that thing done by Wednesday afternoon. If on the other hand I say, hey, I'll email you this thing on Wednesday afternoon and we'll talk about it on Thursday, there's a good chance I'm not going to get it done in email on Wednesday afternoon because that's the sort of thing you can kind of get away with. If you're in a room with people looking at you, waiting for you to present something, you'll have that presentation done if you know in advance that that's what's coming. Because you know when you get there, it'll be too embarrassing for you to not have it done. So you got to kind of leverage your FE concerns against yourself as an ENTP to get shit accomplished sometimes. But not everything can be leveraged in that fashion, and there's lots of ways in which ENTPs try to avoid positioning themselves such that they can be held to account. We don't like being held to account for things. We try to avoid commitments and stuff because we don't like follow through. Follow through is boring. Okay, so that's for ENTP though. Let's say you're something else. Let's say you're an INFJ and you're saying, well, how can I extend my own experience of stuff in life without while being an introverted intuitor extroverted feeler. INFJs have probably the most difficult time of all optimizing beyond their configuration because their configuration works so well. How well your configuration works in the world to achieve practical outcomes for yourself or to achieve a state of okayness in the eyes of others that works for you is going to be a big factor in how much you're able to or want to transcend your existing stack. If you're an INFP, you probably wish that you were a little bit more decisive. If you're an INTP, similarly, you probably wish you were a little bit more decisive. At a certain point, INFPs and INTPs are likely to internalize a sense that they're losers because they're not accomplishing anything close to their potentiality. Unfortunately, it seems that the human experience is such that potential and achievement don't correlate strongly. They correlate weakly. The more potential you have, the less achievement the further short of that potential you're likely to fall. And ESTJs who might initially seem to have low potential because they're not very ideationally powerful. Over time, they become more and more and more and more effective because they're using TE as their tool function. They're managing effectiveness on an ongoing basis. We're not managing effectiveness. INFPs aren't managing effectiveness. INTPs aren't managing effectiveness. INTPs and ENTPs are managing consistency and argumentation. We're saying, here are the explanations of why. Here's why we should make this decision or that decision or whatever. We're not saying, here's how we follow through on that decision. We don't care
No.
about that. Once the decision's been made, once we've articulated what's the right course and why, then we think that our work is done. Somebody else should follow through on it. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we each exist as independent agents in the world, and we're each responsible for our own shit. So we can't just expect others to do the boring parts for us unless we set that up. And setting that up takes some time. And we'd all like to structure our lives such that we could be our naturally occurring cognitive function stack without a lot of stress. But for every
Yes.
personality type, there are areas of life that they are just not good at. If you're an ISTJ or INTJ, you're not good at extroverted feeling. You're making social mistakes a lot, probably, or failing to engage socially in the way that people expect. This is going to have consequences for you. Can you improve on that? Absolutely. Jeremy's got pretty solid FE. Regardless, I think what most ISTJs and INTJs do is excise from their lives concerns of FE. So instead of making FE mistakes, they remain quiet. Or instead of engaging in environments where FE is the primary concern, they engage in environments where FE is devalued. And thus are able to achieve success by avoiding those parts of their of life that require them to use their countervalued or blind or insecure functions. Kaizo, you got any thoughts on this so far?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking like one way ATP may actually optimize the use of functions is by basically doing the groundwork in something like medical field, learning, going to medical school, but then reaching a state of consultancy whereby you have freedom to ideate. That's pretty much the NETI kind of realm whereby you're not held down by doing the groundwork like other doctors, like seeing patients, etc. You're simply there to solve the problems which everybody else can't solve. But you must do that groundwork, which I suppose is the contradiction because it's difficult to even follow through on the groundwork. Because for me, I've had several issues which I could have avoided if I simply followed through on the plans I came up with in my head. I thought to myself, well, I have this problem right now. This problem will probably escalate this way. This is the best situation scenario for me to do this. Therefore, I'll be fine. But in the end, I just don't do anything, and I end up being in trouble because I should have done what I thought I should have done, but I don't do it. And this is pretty systematic. So I think
Right.
essentially it's by being conscious. So one way I have definitely tried to stop ideating as much and focus more on when it comes to writing is just to have a written piece of document somewhere where I can see it the whole day, whereby it reminds me to think in an opposite way to how I usually think. So something to like a permanent reminder.
Mm. Well, I've often said the ideal job for an ENTP is to be hired as a consultant to consult with a company about how I might be useful as a consultant. So basically, you hire me to tell you how you could use me, but you don't actually
Yes.
ever use me for anything. That would be ideal.
Ah,
Yeah, because I'd be really good at coming up with different ways in which you could potentially use my skills, but
yeah.
please don't actually ask me to actually use them because that part sounds boring.
I, I mean, the interesting thing is, I had a lot of freedom in my work, whereby I was able to go in and come back whenever I wanted. But because I misused that freedom by not showing up for a couple of weeks, I have lost that freedom, and I now have to do that what everybody else does, which is check in every morning at 10 a.m. So, in a sense, I've it's because I'm because of my crazy NTP-ness, it's actually caused me to it's caused a problem to a solution that I had found for myself. I found myself a perfect job where I could be myself, but because yeah, because of my cognitive function, I still couldn't escape that and just turn in every day.
We need
I misused it, and
we need extrinsic discipline. That's the thing. We think we have sufficient discipline to optimize our work environment such that work will no longer feel so meh. It will always feel meh
Yeah.
no matter where we're doing it. And if we have only ourselves to police ourselves, then we're not good self policemen at all. We don't have good self discipline. We think we can. We go, oh yeah, I'll be able to follow through on that. That's no problem. That's easy. It is easy. That's why we can't follow through on it. We don't follow through on shit
Yeah.
that's easy. We follow through on shit that challenges us until it no longer challenges us. It's like if I were going to try to conquer the world, and let's
Hmm.
say I were making progress on it, I get to where I was 51% conquered, and I could see the downhill slope and how the rest of it was going to be conquered, and then I'd quit conquering because
Hmm.
once the path is clear, I no longer want to walk it.
Yes, it's strange because even at work I can come up with very really creative ideas and ways to solve problems, and they're pretty effective. But when it comes to follow through and actually just doing the fiddling and the detailed work of making it work, is when that's the element where my brain kind of switches off, and I'll be thinking about something else as opposed to the immediate problem, which I've just suggested a viable solution to. It's almost like I find a solution to something, but then my mind, instead of celebrating, that idea dies in my mind, and I'm looking for a new idea.
Right. Well, any can also be thought of not just as ideation, but as novelty. We seek novelty. We don't like uh, existing solutions. We want to reinvent the wheel. I want my car to move around, but somebody already invented round things that roll. So I want to come up with an alternate way to make my car move because I don't like using existing ideas or something. But
Yeah,
there's lots
it's
of times
something.
when reinventing the wheel is a stupid fucking idea. The wheel works just fine. We don't need to reinvent it. You know,
I mean, an example. Yeah, an
the thing
example
is,
is the hyperloop. I mean, yeah,
regarding the question though of transcending one's own cognitive function stack, the real answer is you can transcend it for other people. It's like understanding other people changes a lot when you understand manners of attention and choose to taxonomy the behaviors and experience of yourself and others around you through that attentional taxonomy. When you do that, you start to understand other people's behaviors and you get less you become more tolerant basically. You say, "All right, I'm not going to just dismiss and hold in contempt this framework of theirs that isn't compatible with my own framework. I'm going to recognize it as implicit to their ontology and try to legitimize it in some way, or at least understand its legitimacy when doing my own analysis of it. It allows me to not hate people who are irrational. You know, when people are talking
yeah,
to me about something, I'm saying, but yeah, but blah 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 blah, and they just get like, oh, well, I don't know, but I'm just still sticking with my conclusion because I like it, and you're being mean. In the past, that would make me absolutely fucking livid, but not so much anymore.
yeah. I mean, that's for me. The worst one is when you present someone with a logical argument, and then you dissect that argument into different pieces, and you come to a pretty undeniable truth based on the argument and the framework that you're arguing upon. But then they still say, well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but this or that, no argument left, no nothing. There's not even a stupid argument. It's just simply that, well, I'm still gonna believe this, and there's no reason why I believe this, and that's
Right.
it.
Well,
And there's
yeah.
nothing wrong with that kind of argumentation if there's no consequence. But if there's a consequence to that person's inability to conform to the truth, or at least truth based on that framework, that becomes troublesome because then they will continue doing the same thing, which may be detrimental to your relationship with that person or general trends that may affect them negatively, but they still wouldn't be able to shift and they don't have a logical argument based on it. It's just, well, that sounds really good, but I still feel this.
They don't. People don't necessarily view the justification of conclusions as justifying conclusions. They view it as something you're supposed to do in order to hold this conclusion. But the holding the conclusion is the point. The justifications are just there to placate the other person. And ultimately,
Yeah.
if if reasons don't support the conclusion, then I'm going to dismiss the reasoning process because that's not my goal. My goal is to have this conclusion and have you validate it. It's not to come to a conclusion. In other words, they're not. A lot of times, people aren't doing ideational stuff to decide what conclusion to ascribe to. They're providing justifications for conclusions they're ascribed to already, and when you dismantle those justifications, they're just like, well, okay, I guess I don't have good enough reasons to believe this, but the whole purpose of having this belief is to have this belief. It's not to, it doesn't need to be justified. And so they get frustrated with us because like you always have to be right, or you always are being difficult, or you just don't, you want to argue with everything. You always want to argue. Well, the thing is, it's a matter of frameworks. We think that if you hold conclusions, they should be justified. They think that if you justify things, it's because you hold a conclusion.
I can see your point. So for them, reasons are there to support their conclusions, not reasons to give them
Determine.
conclusions.
Yeah, they're not in a determining process. Most people don't have that relationship with conclusions. They don't say, conclusions are all tentative, and I'm in a process of collecting the best tentative conclusions, pending further better argumentation that replaces those. That's my
Yeah,
position, and probably yours as well. Most ENTPs probably have
yeah,
some sort of an equivalent position. Most other types don't. INTPs probably do, but even they are much more, they're more hesitant to draw tentative conclusions because they don't like the tentativeness of them. They want them to be absolute. ENTPs are the least tethered ideationally. We don't need to believe things. Unlike almost every other type, we have almost no need to believe things. We're fine with being
that makes a lot.
untethered to certainty. Uncertainty, I have ambiguity tolerance level 1,000,000.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
I tried to
Audra?
I was just saying, I tried to explain that to an INTJ the other day. I'm like, so basically, like, I'm uncertain about everything, like, all the time. They're like, well, maybe you need to pretend to have some. I'm like, no, that won't work either.
Right. It's like I do pretend to have some for the purposes of this conversation. I will agree to certain conclusions absolutely for the purposes of this conversation. And they're like, but you have to then agree that they're true outside of this conversation. No, I don't.
Right, you have, and they're like, and then you have to be wanting some. And I'm like, no, I don't really want any either. I just kind of have the ones that haven't changed in a long time because I haven't found any evidence to defeat them.
Right. Once the argument gets beat, I'll replace it with a new argument that beats it.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, I think I'm stuck in the baby step place whereby I'm not willing to even affirm anything in the. So I think I need to transcend that at least.
You're getting there. You'll understand that there's a purpose in affirming things. But I get where you are too. It's like there's a need for that. There's a desperate need in society for somebody to just go around and negate everybody else's closely held beliefs and point out to them, no, you may not be emotionally attached to this.
Yeah, it's an interesting premise because I think fundamentally we know that everything is uncertain. Like even my own. Okay, I don't want to go as far as nihilism, but I was going to say even my own existence is uncertain. But
give it time.
I think fundamentally. Sorry.
I said, give it time. You'll question that too.
I know I exist because I want to smoke cigarettes. There's no disputing that fact. That's a certainty I can live with. I am certain that I want nicotine. Now, I want nicotine, therefore I am, is what Descartes should have said.
I mean, what about I exist because existence exists, whether it's for a moment. What I see exists because I see it. I perceive, therefore things exist.
Well, I mean, the thing about existentiality is I think to understand it properly, you have to link it to instantiation. Things exist when there's an instance of them. And we can instantiate things. We can create instances of things and therefore create existence. It's the power of the moral agent. So when we talk about whether something exists, the question then is, well, is there an instance of it? If there's an instance of something, then it exists, and if something exists, there's an instance of it. The fact that objects exist, either physical or metaphysical, is a prerequisite to having this conversation. So
Yeah.
even if it's not quote unquote true that something exists, it is absolutely true that there is an instance of it that we are both referring to, and therefore, for the purposes of
Yes.
this conversation, existentiality is necessarily assumed. When we try to dispute existentiality, we use instances of things, therefore existent things, to dispute existentiality, and the whole argumentational scheme collapses. So, I mean, that's the
So,
thing. You can't have a conversation without agreeing about existentiality as a premise to begin with. It has to be an assumption, or else the conversation doesn't happen because it's made out of objects that exist or instances of things.
What if you argue eternal existentiality? So like we may exist right now, but it's time dependent. The universe may exist right now, but it's time dependent. In a different time, things won't exist.
Well, that
So
tries to remove
it's
the
existing.
observer from the equation. That's the thing. You can't have instantiation or existentiality without an observer. So that's where the quantum level comes in. It's like we can try to imagine a universe post observation, but in order to imagine that, we have to observe it. And as a consequence, you can't escape the observational conundrum. It's like, well, does shit exist that nobody observes? No, because it's not instantiated.
I mean, but couldn't you say
All you have to do is give me one example of something that exists that's never been observed to defeat this argument. Nobody's ever been able to do that because as soon as they state something, they're using objects, namely instances of things that exist, to describe something. In order to describe it, it has to be observed, either in your imagination or in reality. So that's the problem that people who want to argue nihilism face, is that they're using instances of existential objects to try to assert non-existentiality. And if they're right, we should ignore everything they say.
yeah, I think the argument does fail in certain levels. I mean, it also depends how you basically what terminological words you use to describe existence. I mean, do ideas do they exist? I mean, if ideas exist, then everything does exist in a
Well,
sense,
ideas
even if
exist,
it's in
but
your
time
mind.
objects and space objects have different qualities. Time objects are things that maintain existence through the application of attention, whereas space objects are things that change their existence through the application of attention. In other words, a rock remains a rock until something happens to it, whereas an idea only remains an idea as long as it's maintained in people's heads or exists in a time object format like a digital video or a digital file, or is imprinted on a space object like a book or something. Even then, the ideas don't exist except insofar as they're internalized by individual people, repeated and or treated as mimetically active in some sense. So yeah, time objects and space objects are both objects. They're both instances of things. They both exist, but they're subject to different rules. That's my interpretation of it. And I like to use the word time object because it draws the equivalency that objects of ideation are just as real and legitimate as physical objects. They're just subject to different rules of how they interact with observer stuff.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thanks for watching
yeah.
Circle
I
Fifth,
mean,
people. This video has been about can you transcend your natural cognitive function stack? Audra, do you have any last comments?
Why would you want to? Is transcendence reliant upon transcending your cognitive function stack?
Why would you want to?
be a slave.
Well, I mean,
No,
I
make.
can go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. What were you saying?
I would imagine that you'd want, like, for example, I might want to have a clearer, uh, I might want to be more effective in SE and following through on some of my ideas that I've already generated that seem like good ideas that deserve follow through and that might produce good results for me, but my stack is such that I tend to be very avoidant towards SE follow through. So you could imagine that I might want to transcend my stack, quote unquote, to make myself more effective in SE or something like that. I don't know if that really counts as transcending your stack, but it does count as optimizing to account for your deficiencies.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, I would throw something along the lines of, if transcending your stack, when we think of that, we think of kind of the general design of like the shared stack, like between ENTPs. But I would say that the kind of go with what you're talking about is the particular instance an individual has, their particular instance manifestation of their stack is perhaps needs to be transcended, but the stack itself, perhaps optimized, does not.